The National Desk, America's News Now.
The threats to America, to Europe, and the world will only keep rising if we don't act.
Ukrainian President Zelensky in D.C. today making a pitch to lawmakers as time runs out to secure more funding for the war with Russia. Then Harvard's president will remain despite resignation calls. Coming up, a look at the debate over how protected speech may have protected her from losing a job. Plus, new inflation numbers out, what they say about the temperature of the economy and what we now know about the price of the American dream. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. President Biden urging Congress to pass a funding package that includes additional aid for Ukraine. Ukrainian President Zelensky in D.C. today meeting with Biden and lawmakers in a last-ditch effort to secure more money and firepower before Congress breaks for the holidays.
Ukraine will emerge from this war proud, free, and firmly rooted in the West unless we walk away.
With the war in Ukraine entering the difficult winter stage, some experts worry Russia will try to gain an upper hand. Why are some pushing back on more aid? Sinclair's chief political correspondent Scott Thuman explains.
President Zelensky, what are the stakes today?
The shouts of questions on Capitol Hill reflecting the uncertainty overseas. How much more funding and support will American lawmakers provide Ukraine in its fight against Russia?
It was a very powerful meeting. President Zelensky made it so clear how he needs help. But if he gets the help, he can win this war.
I've made this very clear, again, from the very beginning, when I was handed the gavel. We needed clarity on what we're doing in Ukraine and how we'll have proper oversight of the spending of precious taxpayer dollars of the American citizens.
President Zelensky meeting Tuesday with top Democrats and Republicans before heading to the White House to ask personally for President Biden's help.
That's very important, and people need to be confident that freedom is secure and strong enough to win.
I've just signed another $200 million drawdown from the Department of Defense for Ukraine, and that'll be coming quickly.
But a recent poll shows 48% of Americans believe Washington is spending too much on aid for Ukraine. Reports indicate America has spent more than $75 billion in the war so far. That's more than 3 times the proposed budgets for U.S. Customs and Border Protection and Immigration Enforcement for this current fiscal year.
Documents ready.
And that's where critics, mostly Republicans, say the focus needs to shift. America's southern border, with a record-breaking number of migrants apprehended and at times as many as 10,000 a day this winter. Republicans want more money for border control before doling out more to Ukraine and Israel as well, even if that delays actions until 2024.
Unfortunately, this is about the only leverage Republicans have to force this administration to actually secure the border, and I think we ought to take that opportunity because this is our top priority, is to secure that border.
Now, back to that $200 million that you heard President Biden talk about and announce today. The White House saying there are a few places they can pull some funds, but by the end of the year, that will be it. The pot will be empty. Amira?
And Scott, you mentioned 2024. How long could this funding fight really drag out?
Well, to be determined when you consider, of course, as you know, that Republicans control the House and Democrats the Senate, and they are very much at odds on all of this. The GOP has really drawn a line in the sand, saying they aren't going to allow funding one without the other. What that means is you have to watch, will lawmakers put it in a large spending bill, which could make things greatly complicated, or will they take them up piecemeal, maybe giving them a better chance of getting passed?
Tricky business here. Scott, thank you so much, as always, from Washington, D.C. for us. House Republicans today took a step toward voting to authorize an impeachment inquiry into President Biden, passing the resolution to do so out of the House Rules Committee. Still, President Biden's impeachment is not inevitable. That's what some Republicans are saying ahead of a House inquiry vote tomorrow. But moving forward, they say will help continue a fact-finding mission.
We have no choice. To fulfill our constitutional responsibility, we have to take the next step. We're not making a political decision. It's not. It's a legal decision.
That route is necessary, they say, because of what they feel is White House obstruction of the ongoing investigation into the president's alleged business ties to his son. The president denies that's the case. He also denies having done anything illegal. As the war rages on in Gaza, President Joe Biden warning Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during a fundraiser in Washington. The president said Israel is beginning to lose support around the world, saying he has to, quote, strengthen and change. They were the most candid and stern remarks to date when it comes to his view of the ongoing war, suggesting distance emerging between the two leaders amidst the heavy bombardment of Gaza. It comes as Gazans spend another day digging through rubble, looking for family members as Israeli missiles struck a residential neighborhood, this time in southern Gaza in Rafah, right near the Egyptian border. In an area, according to the Associated Press, where civilians were told to seek shelter by Israeli forces. The strikes killing 23, including 7 children and 6 women, according to hospital records and an AP reporter who saw the bodies arrive to the hospital. Dozens more deaths also reported in central Gaza, and we're looking at a death toll in the last 2 months now above 18,000, 2/3 of which are women and minors. That's according to the health ministry in Hamas-run Gaza. A climbing death toll Israel has blamed on Hamas, who they've argued are hiding behind civilians. But the Biden administration now being forced to answer tough questions about what Israel is doing to curb the carnage.
We know there's too many civilian casualties. We want them to do more to limit those civilian casualties. Each one is a tragedy. We want the number to be 0, and that's what we're going to continue to do and continue to press with our Israeli counterparts.
It comes as the U.S. steps up some pressure on Israel to open a key Gaza crossing to allow humanitarian aid into the enclave. Today, Israel opened a crossing at their border, but not for goods to enter Gaza, rather to have goods inspected and then sent off to a separate border crossing with Egypt. This as starvation and dehydration become a real concern in the enclave, a desperate need for water, food, medical supplies. As the World Health Organization says, they're seeing widespread infections in children, including diarrhea, impetigo, a contagious skin infection, scabies, and meningitis. Right now, only 11 of the enclave's 36 hospitals are in operation, most of which are partially functioning. Tonight, with the crisis showing no signs of abating, the UN General Assembly voted overwhelmingly to demand a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza in a strong show of global support for ending the Israel-Hamas war. The vote, in which 153 countries voted in favor of a ceasefire, with 10 against and 23 abstaining, showed the growing isolation of the United States, which has been the biggest backer of Israel in its military efforts. The U.S. getting backlash for vetoing a similar resolution on Friday. Today's vote is not legally binding, but does carry weight as a strong reflection of world opinion. Meantime, Harvard President Claudine Gay will retain her job after criticism about her response to anti-Semitism on campus, including a grilling by lawmakers since the Israeli-Hamas war began. And national correspondent Kayla Gaskins is taking a look at the debate over what constitutes protected speech.
Harvard's President Claudine Gay will keep her job, despite calls for her to resign over rising anti-Semitism on campus. The news coming after UPenn's president announced her resignation over the weekend. The two leaders facing similar fire for their performance at a congressional hearing last week. Gay has since apologized for her answers.
Calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context.
The Harvard Corporation releasing a statement Tuesday reaffirming their support for Gay, adding calls for violence against students will not be tolerated. Harvard grad Republican Representative Elise Stefanik had this reaction to the news.
This is a moral failure of Harvard's leadership and higher education leadership at the highest levels.
During the hearing, the presidents of Harvard, UPenn, and MIT argued the anti-Semitic speech in question. Calls for intifada and chanting from the river to the sea fell under the protection of free speech. Nico Perino with the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression says it's a valid argument.
Intifada, from the river to the sea, on their own, constitute protected expression. People have a hard time hearing this. Maybe they don't want to hear that, but context does matter.
Although he understands why critics are so upset.
Harvard definitely has a checkered history on free expression. They put out training sessions and memoranda that say fat phobia is a form of violence. And then when you have a lawmaker asking them whether calls for genocide are protected speech on college campuses, and they say, well, context matters, you can see how people would be frustrated.
Harvard ranked dead last for the 2024 free speech rankings by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins.
Anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. from the beginning of the war through December 7th rose by more than 300% when compared to the same time last year, according to the Anti-Defamation League. And the Council on American Islamic Relations last week said complaints of anti-Muslim incidents over the past 2 months were more than 170% higher than they were last year. The defamation trial against Rudy Giuliani in its second day. Former Georgia election worker Wandrea Shane Moss testified today that she received racist messages and threats after Giuliani claimed she and her mother rigged the state's 2020 election. The judge has already found Giuliani liable. He could have to pay tens of millions of dollars in damages. Meantime, former President Trump's defense team has concluded its case in his civil fraud trial in New York, culminating a lengthy and tense standoff between Trump and New York Attorney General Letitia James. Trump and his two sons and their company are accused of reaping more than $250 million through an alleged scheme designed to misrepresent their wealth. All defendants have denied wrongdoing. Closing arguments scheduled to begin on January 11th, and the judge plans to issue a ruling a few weeks later. Much like Katie Cox from Texas, another woman in Kentucky is filing a lawsuit demanding the right to an abortion. Lawyers for the plaintiff say her embryo no longer has cardiac activity. The suit says the plaintiff was about 8 weeks pregnant. The state's 6-week abortion ban only makes exceptions to save the life of the mother or prevent disabling injury.
Happy that people just recognize it and understand my story and really know that I'm actually innocent. So I'm just proud.
And that was Marvin Haynes speaking today on being free now that a court threw out his murder conviction after nearly 2 decades behind bars. The Minnesota man was wrongfully convicted of murder in 2004 in the killing of a man at a flower shop. He says he looks forward to working and getting his life in order. Coming up, what another drop in the inflation rate adds up to for Americans' long-term finances. Then holidays are a time for celebration, but also present some health risks. What cardiologists want people to know as Christmas and New Year's get closer. Plus, law enforcement is responding to a series of fake bomb threats at schools. The states that have received these suspicious messages. We're back in just 90 seconds. New Labor Department data out Tuesday shows the rate of consumer inflation slowed once again. National correspondent Atrel Nashar breaks down the numbers and new analysis about the multi-million-dollar cost of the American dream.
Slowly but surely, inflation in the U.S. is getting closer to a level economists consider normal. The yearly rate of consumer inflation fell to 3.1% in November, according to the Labor Department. Core consumer inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, was unchanged at 4%.
We've seen easing inflation while the job market has stayed tight. What does that mean? It means wage growth is beating price growth.
The White House celebrating Americans having more buying power. But in a statement reacting to the new inflation report, President Biden said in part, quote, "Despite this progress, I know many Americans still find too many things unaffordable." A new reading of consumer sentiment from the University of Michigan shows people are starting to feel better about where inflation is headed, but their overall sentiment is still lower than it was before the pandemic. Certainly a political liability for President Biden heading into an election year with low approval ratings of his handling of the economy. A recent CBS poll asked adults about their standard of living compared to what their parents was at their age. 46% said worse. Only a third said better.
The fact that the cost of living continues to go up year after year, even though inflation is cooling a little bit, just means it's going to take more money to have those basic requirements in your life.
According to an Investopedia analysis, the American dream, aspirational events like throwing a wedding, buying a home, having kids, retiring, costs an estimated $3.4 million over a lifetime. Compare that to Americans' average lifetime earnings of $2.3 million. Becoming a homeowner is especially difficult. With a 10% down payment and roughly 7% interest rate, it will cost almost $800,000, according to Investopedia.
So if you can't own a home and have real estate and then pass that on to future generations, it's really difficult to build generational wealth in your family.
An expensive reality that could put the American dream even farther out of reach for the next generation. In Washington, I'm Atrel Nashar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
Atra, thank you. Lawyers for Florida Governor DeSantis are asking a federal judge to dismiss a free speech lawsuit filed by Disney. The park claims DeSantis used state powers to retaliate against the company, violating its First Amendment rights. The feud began last year when Disney opposed Florida's so-called Don't Say Gay law. DeSantis appointees and Disney are battling in state court over control of the district that makes up Disney World. Former U.S. Representative George Santos in court today for his federal criminal fraud case. Santos has pleaded not guilty to a total of 23 charges, including wire fraud and money laundering. Prosecutors say they're in negotiations for a plea deal with the former lawmaker. Santos's attorney expressed optimism about the talks today. The next hearing in the case set for January 23rd. Cleanup efforts, meantime, they continue in Tennessee for the third full day after deadly tornadoes left a trail of destruction through multiple counties on Saturday. The community is mourning the loss of 6 people and dozens of others who were hurt. Thousands of residents still don't have power as of this afternoon. Sumner County schools are closed today but plan to reopen tomorrow. The United Nations Annual Climate Change Summit is going on for longer than planned. Today was supposed to be the last day after nearly 2 weeks of negotiations, but delegates have not yet reached an agreement. The draft agreement released yesterday dropped a call to phase out fossil fuels and instead called for a reduction. It's not clear when the summit will end. Emergency room visits for COVID-19, flu, and RSV collectively have reached their highest levels in the U.S. since February. Among the three, COVID continues to be the biggest driver. Hospitals reported more than 22,000 new COVID admissions the week ending December 2nd. The CDC says levels of respiratory illnesses are high in the South, plus in New York and New Jersey. Well, a warning out today from cardiologists as we head into the Christmas week and the new year. Medical reporter Liz Bonis sharing what they want us to know about holiday heart syndrome.
Holiday heart syndrome is a collection of symptoms that raise our risk for heart events around the holidays. It likely contributes to some startling statistics this time of year. According to the American Heart Association's journal Circulation, More cardiac deaths occur on December 25th than on any other day of the year. The second largest number of cardiac deaths occurs on December 26th, and the third on January 1st. Dr. Konstantin German, a cardiologist at Ohio's Tri-Health, explains what contributes to holiday heart syndrome.
The holidays are a great time. People get together. Unfortunately, we also tend to kind of, have a little bit more of excess.
Excess alcohol, excess caffeine, excess food high in salt and fat, as well as excess stress all contribute to the number one presenting symptom of holiday heart syndrome, he says, atrial fibrillation, or an irregular heart rhythm.
Symptoms can include a racing heart, chest pressure, chest pain. And the big issue of atrial fibrillation is if you have certain other risk factors, such as heart failure, hypertension, age over 65, diabetes, or previous heart attacks or strokes, you are at a higher risk for future strokes.
Dr. German says avoiding excess alcohol this time of year is his top suggestion to prevent this syndrome. It tends to lower inhibitions, which can drive up food intake and potentially add stress to already stressful situations. The American Heart Association also says being aware that these lifestyle choices influence the heart also critical in prevention. With your health news, I'm medical reporter Liz Bonus.
Liz, thank you. Up next, what schools are urging parents and students to do in response to fake bomb threats impacting several states. We have reporters all across the country covering the issues that matter most to you. We're taking the pulse of America.
It appears as though Kia and Hyundai vehicles were targets during these break-ins as well.
Last month, we spoke with police about another spree of break-ins they believed were fueled by a social media trend that shows teens how to break into cars, specifically Kias and Hyundais, as defects in their engines allow for easy access. Captain Artemis says the suspects you see here from those break-ins are likely responsible for Sunday's break-ins too.
The fact remains is Kias and Hyundais, especially the year models that are able to be stolen, they're hugely popular cars, and you're going to find them in pretty much any large apartment complex throughout the city.
What makes this case difficult, according to Captain Artemis, is that there's no rhyme or reason to where the suspects are going.
You've got the spree on Long Shoals Road, you have another spree on Sweet Creek Road, but then you have what appears to be completely on the other side of town in West Asheville, a very similar spree.
The driver was swerving, so bounced and hit the building a second time.
Lockley posted this photo of the car on his Facebook page.
The vehicle was totaled, and the side of our building had been completely punctured through twice. You start peeling away the bricks and the broken drywall and find that essentially the whole facade of our building on the east side has to be replaced.
Repairs will have the restaurant closed until December 22nd.
It's a big hit. It's a couple of our busiest weeks out of the entire year. So this really, really hurts.
Crashes and other traffic accidents typically go up during the holiday season. So Lockley has this advice for drivers.
Slow down, stay safe. You don't want this to happen to you.
An increased police presence at schools across Montgomery County. This after multiple districts received an email last night claiming to be from Russian terrorists threatening to bomb these schools. Sheriff Streck and other law enforcement say none of the threats were credible and there was no imminent danger for any of the districts. But it's not just the Miami Valley that was impacted. Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland area schools received the same threats, but this has also been happening in other parts of the country.
The FBI was right away able to tell us that last month, California schools received this same email, and then last week, Texas schools received this email.
Centerville and Springboro schools sent the following 2 letters to parents in their districts, warning them of yesterday's threats and urging their parents and students to report anything suspicious immediately.
SpaceX scrubbed Falcon Heavy's rocket launch coming up, when you can expect to see it, and why a few more eyes will be on the skies when it lifts off. We'll have to wait until Wednesday to see SpaceX's powerful Falcon Heavy rocket take to the skies again. The launch was supposed to happen last night, but about 30 minutes before its planned liftoff, SpaceX scrubbed the launch due to technical issues. Falcon Heavy, making only its 9th launch, is essentially 3 Falcon 9 rockets strapped together, which produces 5.1 million pounds of thrust on liftoff, the most powerful rocket available for regular launches. Excited to see it in action. That does it for this edition of the National Desk. I'm Amira David. Thank you so much for watching.